Hey, good morning. My name is Daniel Cornwall. I'm the Internet and Technology Consultant for the Alaska State Library. And today I am joined by Claudia Haines, the Children's Librarian at the Homer Public Library. And today we're going to talk to you about a global computer coding event called the Hour of Code. I'm going to introduce the event from my ivory tower here in Juneau, and then Claudia is going to tell you how she's actually been implementing it for the past year or two at the Homer Public Library. And as you have questions, we have a small enough group that you can either unmute your microphone and talk to us or type a message into the chat window. And it does seem like you've both found the chat window.
So I'll just go ahead and say, I think Jennifer and I, if I'm not mistaken, it's my colleague Jennifer, are both going to be hosting an Hour of Code. So I think that both of us are on that team.
Oh, excellent. And would you tell me what library you're from, Eve?
I'll let Jennifer do that. Jen.
Oh, Jen Ward. Would this be UAS?
That's correct. Jen, do you have a microphone?
I think Jen does have a microphone. Eve, I guess we haven't met. So yeah, I did do some temporary reference out at UAS for a while, but it's really great that you're going to be holding something out there.
Actually, so Jen does not have a mic, and I'll try and enlighten a little bit about it. She was contacted by Freya to see if she had some interest in hosting an Hour of Code out at the university. And Jen contacted both me and Colleen McKenna. We work in the School of Management. Both of us teach, computer technology, related things. And both of us got right on board with her. And so we're going to we want to know what sort of experiences you all have to share so that we can do the right things and avoid the wrong things, and etc.
Okay, great. Well, I'm going to go ahead and get started, and I'm glad that you mentioned Freya because that jogged my memory that the Alaska State Library, we're still working on some details, but we are leaning towards having some sort of Hour of Code event ourselves, although we may work on some unplugged events just because we basically only have a couple of computers people can work on. Anyway, to the main event. This is our agenda, which I've pretty much verbalized already. Even though the Q&A is posted at the end, feel free to text or tell us your questions along the way. So basically, the Hour of Code was started several years ago by a consortium of nonprofits and technology companies, and it was to answer the twin problems of students in all levels, although especially in K through 12, not having the basics of coding skills, which seems like it's becoming a more and more important skill to have in the 21st century, and particularly the issue of women in technology. It's an interesting bit of trivia, but when electronic computers first started coming online in the 1940s and 50s, a lot of the programmers were in fact women. And on this slide, we're looking at a picture of Admiral Grace Hopper, and she was one of the first computer programmers, and in fact, actually put together the COBOL programming language, and which is one of the earliest ones. COBOL and Fortran are some of the earliest ones. And if you've ever heard about debugging a program, it was Admiral Hopper who first came up with that term. Although in those days, in addition to referring to issues with the program itself, computers were so large that they actually had to contend with physical bugs, nibbling on the wires or getting shorted out in connections. So in December is the month that Admiral Hopper was born, and so that's where the Hour of Code people started to focus on it. And it's also a set of tutorials that we'll look at some of them at code.org. And while it's something that can be done anytime, they do tend to focus on the first or second week of December to kind of bring a global focus and social media saturation to events. And so we're hoping that it can be an event that can build bridges between libraries and schools and the wider community. And here are examples of some of the coding activities, and these are ones that are paced to take about an hour to learn some basic skills. They also have some resources that you can go beyond the second one. Oh, and let me say something about the chat. I don't know if you were intending to do a private chat, but in the window above where you type in your text, there's a send to, and you can change it from whoever you've sent it to everyone, and then all of us will be able to see it. I see a note from Eve that you're probably going to do the second one maybe. And then I'm just going to go through a few more of the codes. Most of them are child-oriented, but most of them can be done with pretty much any age. So this map here gives you an idea of how popular and global this particular event is. As of this just represents the people who have consciously and deliberately signed up with code.org to say, yes, we are very definitely going to have an Hour of Code event. And as of last week, there were about 77,000 events worldwide on pretty much every single continent. I mean, you can see that it's concentrated in North America and in Europe, but there are good chunks in Asia and elsewhere. Oh, excellent. Well, if you go to code.org, there is a place where you can, the question here is that, not question, but the comment is you haven't registered yet. And there's a spot on code.org where you can fill out your event. So this is globally, and the question is, okay, well, how popular is it in Alaska? And every single one of these green dots are places where the Hour of Code events are going to be held. A lot of them are actually schools, and if you look up on the North Slope, these little dots are all schools. So I think it's really great that from Ketchikan to Barrow, there's going to be computer coding events hosted around the world. And then I mentioned that it was a consortium of nonprofits and technology companies. So here are some of the people who've donated either money or time. And I'll just kind of let you look at the different logos. If you go onto the Hour of Code site, there is a place where it says, partners, and this list goes on and on, kind of seemingly forever. I've just lifted some highlights from the backers. So a question from Eve about who else is offering this in Juneau. Aside from the State Library in UAS, Auk Bay Elementary is going to be offering some events, and I'm not really clear on who else will.
Daniel, before you switch the slide,
sure.
I wanted to add something about this. That, as Daniel said, that if you go to the code.org site, you'll see this incredibly long list of organizations, businesses, entities that are part of code.org. And I think that's very significant that all of these groups are, and in many cases they're competing businesses, are actually able to collaborate and kind of get behind this move to encourage coding across the globe. And I can't think of another effort where this kind of collaboration has happened. There might be one, but that really has struck me about this effort.
Yeah, I agree with you, Claudia. I mean, it really does seem like rivals gathering together in the service of a common good, which is, you know, a really great thing to see these days. So I'm going to go ahead and switch the slide. And now it's time for me to switch presentation roles over to Claudia and let her tell you how Hour of Code is actually working on the ground. Take it away, Claudia.
So good morning from Homer. Again, my name's Claudia Haines, and before I get into the specifics of how coding and the Hour of Code looks at our library, I want to talk a little bit about why we decided to host coding programs and participate in the Hour of Code. So we decided to participate last December for multiple reasons. And I say that's decided last December because that really launched us into what has turned into regular coding programs at our library. And so originally, we wanted to do it because, as you all know, as we all know, that lots of kids like to play digital games and watch digital content. And so we've been talking about and really focusing on ways to get kids not only just consuming content, but actually creating and redesigning digital content for a different purpose. And so this is kind of, this idea is kind of starting to be called hacking literacy. And so it's taking some digital content and reconfiguring it, redesigning it, manipulating it for a different purpose. And so coding lets kids and teens and adults do that. Coding requires clear and respectful communication at the Homer Public Library. Because we have limited resources, coders generally have to share computers in our coding programs, and so they end up doing what's called pair programming. And there's a great video that some girls did that's on the code.org site that talks about how to make pair programming successful, and that has really worked well for us. So pair programming encourages collaboration, and so sometimes it's just two coders working together, sometimes there are multiple kids collaborating, and as we know, two heads are better than one, so they're working as a team and kind of getting comfortable collaborating. Coding also develops problem solving. Daniel referred to the concept of debugging. That's problem solving in the coder world. It also gets them working on their critical thinking skills. It promotes creativity in a different media. It engages different kinds of learners. If you've ever seen kids around digital media, you know it is very engaging. And some kids, you know, just need a different way to learn, need a different outlet for their creativity. And so coding does that in a pretty positive way. And one of the other reasons we kind of jumped on this effort to provide coding programs is that coding is a lot easier than when I was a kid, and it's much more visual with something that's called Blockly, and I'll show you what that looks like. But if you go to any of the tutorials, the basic tutorials on code.org, or Made with Code, or Scratch, or any of the apps that I talk about, they use Blockly. That's a very visual way to introduce the idea of coding. And coding is fun. I did not grow up as a coder. I basically learned to code in an effort to teach kids and their families how to code, and it has worked out great. Okay. Let me change the slides here. So coding and other tech programs at the library kind of come from our broader effort to embrace media mentorship. And so media mentorship is the idea that children's librarians and libraries are about supporting the literacy and media needs of children, teens and their families, and that includes screen media, digital media. Media mentorship is also about providing access to and sharing recommendations for and research on children and teens media use. And so that's kind of the overarching theme of media mentorship. But how do we do this? So we do this by providing access to digital technology along with the traditional materials we offer, like books. So we provide access to computers, we provide access to iPads, we have digital content available at the library. That's not particularly new. But then we also model how to use technology in positive ways, and that's where coding and these coding programs come into it. And then we just teach how to use the digital technology. Again, that's how the coding programs come into it. So media mentorship is also part of libraries' continuing effort to address the digital divide. As you know, even with the proliferation and adoption of mobile devices, many people don't have internet. There are many parts of Alaska that are poorly connected, as we all know, or are not connected. And so libraries really help fill that gap. Coding is part of many jobs, hobbies, activities. We've kind of broached that topic a little bit. And many kids and teens don't have access to or don't have the necessary skills to use that technology. And if they do have access, they don't know how to use it successfully. And so there's the digital divide, which talks about access to technology. But these days, as the digital divide might be becoming smaller, what is prevalent is the participation gap. And so kids, that's the idea of kids not knowing how to use the digital tools effectively to participate in and define our digital world. And so if you want to learn more about media mentorship, you can go to the Association for Library Service to Children site. There's a white paper that came out earlier this year, and it kind of talks about this in more detail. But I just wanted to give you a little idea of where coding programs came from at the Homer Library. Okay, so I mentioned that last December we jumped on board with the Hour of Code during Computer Science Week, and we offered a coding program specifically for girls and the adults that wanted to come with them. And this came out of a couple things. One is I started looking around, as I often do when I plan programs, for what are the gaps, the learning gaps in our community. I look at what's being offered at school by other organizations, what families are interested in, and see how the library might fit there. And so what I saw in the terms of the gaps was there weren't a lot of opportunities for kids to learn how to code. And then I started looking at the programs, particularly any technology programs that we did offer, and noticed that there weren't a lot of girls attending. And I started asking myself if that was just something that was happening in Homer, whether it was the type of program, whatnot. And so then I started to do a little research, and that's when I kind of discovered more about this international trend for the need for programmers, the need for coders, but the very low participation on the part of girls and women in computer science, in programming, in coding. And so I thought, well, maybe it's the type of programs we're offering, or maybe it's the format of the program, or maybe the girls want to see more female mentors in these kind of situations. And so I designed a program based on the research and kind of filling those gaps, and came up with a program for specifically for girls between the ages of 8 and 12. As I mentioned, we used 6 laptops, and there were about 10 to 12 girls that came with their adults. Some were just kids and some came in a kid-adult pair, and they teamed up and used those computers together. We ran it like a lab, so they used many of the tutorials that you'll find on the Hour of Code site. They're free, basically hour-length tutorials. And the reason I did it in a lab style was because it allowed the teams to work at their own speed and kind of delve into different tutorials as much as they wanted to. We kind of focused on 2 tutorials. One of them was the Frozen tutorial, and another one was Angry Birds. But I also spent a little bit of time at the beginning as a group. And then, so we did some work together as a group. They worked on the tutorials. And then I also had a fleet of iPads with some other coding apps that they could explore, so that when they left the building, they had a bunch of different resources. They tried a bunch of different things. So we needed laptops. We had a large monitor. We brought in paper and pencils. We had the iPads. We brought food, which is an important part of this program, keep those brains fed. We also brought some fixings for peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, which I'll talk about in a minute. And the program went very well, and Daniel and I actually talked more about this program in last year's webinar, so if you want to know more about it, you can look at that webinar. And peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. So this is a fun thing to talk about because for a lot of people this has nothing to do with coding, but in fact it is a great way to introduce the concept of coding. So when the kids and adults first came into the room, and I've used this almost every time I've done a coding program, many of them don't know each other, which is the beauty of a shared space like the library. And so this serves both as an icebreaker and as a way to capture kids' attention. And what we do is we pretend that myself or one of the other adults that's helping out is a robot. And the group's responsibility is to get the robot to make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich using very simple, specific instructions. And so basically what they're doing is creating an algorithm, which is a list of instructions to perform a task. And so that's really the intro into coding right there. And it creates lots of giggles because it's actually quite hard to do this if you aren't in a coding mindset. Code Studio, which is part of the code.org site, also has lots of other unplugged activities that you can do. And I really suggest combining them so you kind of capture kids' attention or capture teens or adults' attention before they get to work on the actual computers. Okay, so some of the coding tools that we used are listed here. Made with Code is a Google project targeting girls and women. We mentioned the gap before. And so they have kind of taken coding from a different perspective and really gone at it from a very creative, artistic perspective. And so you'll find how coding is being integrated into fashion, into dance, into kind of humanitarian projects. It's just a very interesting twist. So instead of focusing on video games, they're focusing on the real life implementation of coding. They also have lots of tutorials and links to other resources for either educators or people just wanting to learn how to code. The Hour of Code we mentioned has lots of tutorials. It's tutorials not just for 1 hour of code, but if you want to take coding to another level, you want to learn how to code, to offer a program in December or any time of year, lots of resources. I think anyone involved with coding will suggest you start there. Scratch is both a coding language and a coding community that was developed by the MIT Media Lab, and it's very popular in schools, and it's actually been very successful here at the library, and I'll talk about that a little more and give you a little sneak peek into it. The 4 icons at the bottom of the screen are coding apps that we used last year. There are more, but these ones are really kind of play-based introductions to coding. Several of them have offered free Hour of Code versions, but otherwise they're just a couple dollars. And they really engage new coders in very different ways. So we offered the chance for kids and teens in our program to kind of play with all of them to see which kinds they liked. The names of those apps, there's Tinker, Lightbot, Codable, and Hopscotch. Codable is really designed for the classroom, and so there's lots of support, For educators, there's also the option to have multiple players and kind of keep track of them. Lightbot is an interesting one. There's kind of a regular version and a junior version for younger kids, and it's kind of three-dimensional, which is pretty interesting because the other ones are pretty flat. And that three-dimensional kind of movement of a little robot jumping from one square to the next is pretty interesting. So it's worth trying a bunch of them. So hopefully that was answer to your question there, Eve. So what are we doing this year? So this year has looked a little bit different. Ever since last December, we've actually offered multiple coding programs at the library. And after we offered the program for girls, we had a lot of response and a lot of conversation in the community about it. And so we offered another program for boys and girls. And then during our summer learning program, we offered 2 more coding programs. And one was for both boys and girls, and then a second was for girls. Both of them were full. Some of the girls that came to the boys and girls program returned the next day for the girls program. And so we're kind of really creating this culture and interest in coding as part of a broader set of programs of, just this culture of coding and interest in technology. So that's been quite fun. This year, our Hour of Code program will be part of the Maker Club. And so the Maker Club started in October and is a weekly program targeting 10 to 13-year-olds. And it was funded by the Association for Library Service to Children Curiosity Creates grant program. And so we were one of 79 libraries across the country that were awarded a grant to fund efforts that really inspire creativity, exploration, informal learning, and ours uses both high and low tech tools. So each week we kind of focus on a different tool, but let kids really explore. Like yesterday, we talked about electricity with squishy circuits and makey-makeys. We play a lot with Legos and stop motion animation. We'll do cooking, coding, wearable arts, outdoor photography. So the Hour of Code really fits nicely with this. It's really a great environment for introducing coding. And so what we're going to do this year is follow up with what we used this summer, and we're going to kind of explore Scratch. And what I like about Scratch is that, with the basic goal of the program in December will be to get kids actually creating games or mazes depending on their interest, and just really learn the basics of coding, creating those instructions. They'll basically create a prototype of a game. Other kids in the room will be able to test it. If the game doesn't work, they'll have to figure out what the problems are, debug it, and on the next slide I'll show you what Scratch looks like. But beyond what we did this summer, we're also going to introduce the Makey-Makey, which is what you see over on the right-hand side. And that's kind of an invention kit, they call it, that turns conductive things into touchpads with a computer. And so that little board and the USB cable and the alligator clips basically trick a computer into thinking that, for example, a banana is a key. And so kids will use the Makey-Makey to then run their games. And so it's a really, really fun, easy way to talk about how electricity works and the idea of the loop and the circuit. And we used those yesterday, and so the reason I introduced them yesterday is so that in December, and in just a few weeks, when we break those out again, they'll be comfortable with that piece of it and be able to integrate it nicely. It is really fun, and of course we have those OWL labels on the computers because the OWL effort has really made so much of this kind of work at the library happen, so we couldn't be more appreciative. Okay, so what does Scratch look like? So once Scratch is either, you can use it online or there is a downloadable version, an offline version. And as you may experience at your library here in Alaska, sometimes the internet is not as reliable. And when you have 6+ computers in a room with Wi-Fi that is not exceptional, and it can get tricky. So we actually use the offline version. And so you can download the program. And the basic idea is that you use these blocks. This is that Blockly platform this Blockly way of coding that I talked about. You click these blocks together, and each of the blocks has a command, basically a bit of code in it. And so when you click them together, almost like Legos, it creates what eventually becomes a program. And so you can make the cat on the screen animated, you can add sound, you can customize this in so many ways. And so once we start just showing the kids how to use this, they just go wild. They'll explore all these different pieces. And so really the introduction is brief, and it's just a chance for kids to play. And the mentors that are part of the program, myself, and this year we have a mentor in training who is a high school student here who comes to the Maker Club every week. She and I will kind of move around and help the teams kind of work through whatever problems they have. But I just wanted to kind of show you this. And one of the things that I like about it is that it's free. It's pretty simple to use and learn. There are lots of tutorials, lots of information for educators and parents. There are even Scratch playing cards, which I talked about last year, that you can kind of challenge students with. We've never actually had to do that. The kids just kind of go wild. The other thing that's nice is that kids can set up accounts, and so they can kind of save what they've made. They can also share it in the Scratch community, which some libraries might hesitate to do that. I don't necessarily have the kids sign up right there. That's kind of up to them and their families. But it is a good opportunity to talk about digital citizenship and the responsibility of having an account in a community like that. We don't necessarily always have those opportunities, but that's a nice one to just kind of slip that in there. There's also a Scratch Junior for young children, because this complex version of Scratch is not available as an app, but Scratch Junior is. It's a lot more basic, but it's a nice way to introduce the concept of coding to young children. And in fact, I just learned that there is a new Scratch Junior that is a collaboration with PBS Kids that's coming out December 5th. So any of you who know young children might want to kind of pay attention to that one. And then if you don't want to use Scratch and you want to use some of the tools on code.org, I know on December 2nd they're going to do a preview of the tools that will be available this year. You're obviously able to use whatever tutorials are on there, but each year they introduce some new ones with different themes and such. So mark your calendars for December 2nd, and you can find out about that on the code.org site. Also following code.org on Twitter, they have a bunch of different messages that pop up about that. All right. So in addition to the webinar that we talked about last year, there are some great resources for librarians and educators and, of course, parents about understanding coding, learning a lot more about coding, and teaching coding. And so these four are my favorite. We keep going back to the Hour of Code because it's such a full-service site. Scratch Ed is part of the Scratch website that targets educators. It has lots of lesson plan material, just kind of how to go about it. Code Academy and Khan Academy both are rich with tools for anyone wanting to learn coding. And there's a variety of languages, a variety of uses for coding. And so while I really focus at this introductory level, I find ways to support families that have kids that really want to go for it. Because we're still at this place where there are enough kids wanting to get introduced to coding that we haven't gone that step further. So that's why I always give kids and families, when they leave our programs, a list of resources where they can kind of go to the next level. So that's what I have, and I thought if we could open it up for questions, if there's any specifics about anything that I've talked about, I'm happy to share. I'd love to hear if any of you have had any experiences so far. I know you're talking about plans for December, but please feel free to ask me any questions.
Thanks, Claudia. So we have a small enough group that, well, Jennifer can text questions, and the other two, if you have microphones, go ahead and unmute and ask or comment. Go ahead, Eve.
So I know that during Claudia's presentation, she might not have been able to see, and it's the little chat area is a scroll bar. So you might want to scroll up there, Claudia. I did post a link to Jen and I have a planning site for our Hour of Code, you know, and the theme, of course, is a notebook. So it's kind of our scratch pad for keeping track of what we need to work on, as well as the ideas that we have for the event. We've put on there where we're going to have it, the date, the time, some ideas about how to open it up, and things like that. And it would be really nice to have one or both of you just take a brief look at it, you know, browse around it, and maybe give us some feedback on some things that we might want to jot down to think about planning for, or that kind of thing. The other thing that I wanted to comment on is that the Hour of Code is wonderfully targeted for school-aged children. And of course, I don't have to say it, but I want to share it, of course, that we all know that we're here right now because adults don't know about coding, and they still kind of need to know a bit themselves. And we at the university, of course, locally, face-to-face, we have traditional students, young students, 18 and so forth, over typically on the campus. And although we have a large or a sizable gaming kind of a student, not all of those, or some of those are probably easier to get into understanding code and maybe taking classes and things like that in, say, you know, Java and things like that might help. So it was, as I mentioned in one of my chat contributions, that love Hour of Code. It takes a lot of digging to get resources that are geared more towards that age group and up. So, you know, any sorts of ideas that you all might have encountered or experienced that are successful for that more adult group is appreciated. So that, I think I'll stop there.
So, Eve, one of the things that we've done at the library is kind of used Pinterest a little bit as a library to kind of really focus on some of the tech tools that we want to share with people in Homer and beyond. And my coworker, Holly Brennan, created a board about learning to code. And so she has pinned a bunch of different sites on there and information about coding. And again, obviously some of those tools are kid-based, but she's also kind of broadened it. You know, Khan Academy is definitely one of those places where you can go beyond the kid-focused tutorials, but you can take a look at there and see if there are any sites that might be helpful, or that kind of approach to sharing coding information and tutorials might work.
Yeah, so she has a Pinterest. If you wanted to share that Pinterest so we could take a look at that collection, that'd be great.
Yeah, give me 1 second, and I will find the link to it here.
Hey, Claudia, I just dropped it into the chat window.
Thank you. And I think there was a question about the adult participation in our programs, and we definitely, particularly with the first programming, the coding program for girls, we definitely encouraged adults to come, in part because we recognize that if kids want to continue coding at home, they need that family support, because sometimes when adults don't understand what the kids are doing, they see it as, oh, the kids are just playing video games again, and they may not understand the other skills that kids are learning when they're actually creating the content. So we did have good participation there. The other programs that we've run, we've really encouraged the adults to come into the room and test what the kids and teens have made, and that has really made a connection. We haven't had as many adults participate just because the kind of series of programs have really been kid-focused. And I focus at the library my work on kids and teens that are 18 and under, and I support families around that idea. So I haven't particularly offered any programs particularly for adults, although I would think that there is a gap and a need for that. And so Jennifer and Eve, or Jen and Eve, sorry, I'm looking at Jennifer, I'm looking at your name up on the board there. What are you all going to do at UAS? Do you know yet?
Yeah, so I'm not sure whether you have had a chance to take a look at the link that I showed you there. We're not final yet on what we're going to do. But we do have in the navigation bar, there's a lesson plan there, or sort of agenda for that hour period of time. And, you know, we expect to, because it's going to be, for the most part, marketed for those who are at the Juneau campus, we will have a cart of laptops provided by our IT folks. So we expect that for the most part, people will be able to do things online. And so we have a little analog piece to the event, but we expect that we will be able to maybe serve everyone with the computer. And if not, of course, we'll do the pairing for those who don't have or are not feeling comfortable taking the reins yet. Our analog piece is at this point, it's kind of coming in to the venue by following the blocks that are featured in that writing your first program, or whatever that second tutorial is that's provided on the code.org tutorials. And so that, you know, we'll have them, as they come into the venue, try to record how they're getting to a certain spot in the room, and just use that as a step-off point for welcoming them and for sharing their directions that they recorded. And then we'll show a nice, one of those brief little inspirational videos that's provided on code.org. And then get them right into that Write Your First Program activity. And probably, you know, this is a lunch hour sort of thing. So we expect that will kind of take up that whole space of time. And then we'll wrap it up with a little debrief, do the print certificates, hand out stickers sort of thing, the I went the hour code or whatever that little sticker is that they have. And then offer them some next steps, kind of what can you do if you want to go beyond this hour of code. And I think for that hour, we'll pretty much have filled it out for the event. So, and again, this is, at this point, kind of where we're going. We've got a group of us who have to tweak it, but that's what we're looking at so far.
Yeah, Eve, I just jumped over there and looked at it. It looks great.
Okay, yeah, and so any sort of, we're trying to, we've got food coming, so we're planning to cover the laptop keyboards with cellophane. I read somewhere that helps for any kind of spills or crumbs that might happen to make their way to the keyboard. We also will provide, covered disposable containers for people to put their beverages in, and so napkins. I mean, we're kind of planning, trying to make as much as possible within that hour, a productive and fun hour.
And I offer food at all these Maker Club programs and at the coding programs, and I have really, we've had usually between 10 and 12 people at each of these, and I've really never had issues with the food and drink, and I don't know if I've just been lucky and should be knocking on wood here, but I think the food and drink part of it makes it festive, and just be clear about what your expectations are. But I've never had any issues with any of the iPads, any of the laptops, anything like that. So I think I have found that the kids and adults have really been so engaged once they walk in the door that the food is really like this extra part. You almost have to convince people to eat. They're so intrigued by what's going on. So.
Thanks for sharing that. I've taught computer apps for decades now, and we've always had, well, if you're going to bring something in, closed container and so forth, and I haven't really had any issues either. But we are borrowing these laptops, so I just want to, be respectful and so forth. So
I'm sure they will appreciate that. So, Jen, I'm just looking at your message in the chat box, and the girl coding program, I did offer for 2 hours, and in fact, the other programs that I've offered, I have used a 2-hour period, contrary to the hour of code idea, and that's because it kind of really has given the groups enough time to explore what they wanted to explore. I think you can do probably with adults, you could probably easily get away with an hour of code, but I wanted it to be a pretty low pressure opportunity. And, considering that some of these kids may not have any access to any of these resources once they leave the door, I really wanted them to kind of really get deep into it as much as they wanted to and see if it's something they wanted to continue with. Yes, and time to bond, because, as I mentioned before, the library is one of those few community resources that is a completely shared space. And so even in a small place like Homer, there are kids coming together that don't go to school together, either because they're at a different school or slightly different age. And so that time really gives them a chance to meet some new people, and even meet me or the high school student who's the other mentor in training. So that's a really nice opportunity for us to kind of get to know each other better. Thanks. These programs are really fun. I talk about all the reasons to do them, but it is really fun when you get a chance to, build a game and then have other people play it, or play with use bananas to control your maze or game. It just, it's hard not to giggle.
And this is Daniel, and kind of looking at Jen, if there was an interest in and bringing Claudia to Southeast, and she was willing, that seems like it would be a perfect opportunity for an ILC grant to put together a sort of, coding for everyone type of event. Oh, ILC, it stands for the Interlibrary Cooperation Grant, and it would probably be, if you went that route, you would probably have Jennifer write it. I'm just going to bring up the grant site real quick.
What I love about the Hour of Code and this kind of hour concept is that, it kind of gets over as, as a, informal educator, as a librarian, or even as, someone who works in the schools. It really, I think, takes the pressure off. And so if you know of a teacher or you know of a librarian in Juneau or wherever that really understands the importance of teaching kids or families how to code, but is a little hesitant, I just really encourage them to go there, because the great things about kids and digital tools is not necessarily that they just automatically get it, but they don't have any preconceived notions about how these things should work, so they're less inhibited and more apt to explore. So once you give these kids and teens the opportunity and the basics of how they work and the support to go, they will go. And so an hour introduction, giving their families tools to pursue it further, is really, really easy for most people to get. And so I think that's really, really the most important thing about Hour of Code is really empowering adults to empower kids. And I know a lot of you are talking about working with adults, but I really think that this makes it almost as easy as it could possibly get. And so all of us can, I think the best thing we can do is really support all librarians and really anybody to kind of get on board with this. And yes, elementary school libraries, high school libraries, any school libraries, many school libraries do this. In fact, many school libraries have some sort of maker club or maker space that this is part of. So it doesn't need to be public libraries. And I'm always happy to talk about my experience, but I am just one of zillions of people doing it. Yeah. And I'm so glad all these places are jumping on board, and I was so glad to see so many sites across the state that Daniel had on that map. It's really inspiring. And no, it does not need to be in the first week in December. The Hour of Code tutorials are up all year, and they just do it that week in December to honor Computer Science Week and some of the pioneers in programming. But let's keep programming. Let's keep coding.
Okay, thank you, Claudia. It was very inspiring, and it looks like we've got some really good energy coming out of here, which is really great. And I see that we're almost to time, normally scheduled for an hour, and I see it's 9:57. Are there any last questions or comments from anyone?
I just want to say thank you all for those of you that joined us live, and I look forward to sharing more, and I hope lots of people check in on the webinar. So thank you, Daniel, for organizing this again this year.
Oh, you're very welcome, and thank you so much for presenting, because I really value your practical experience. And speaking of practical experience, Jennifer, I will look to see if I can come on November 30th, because I think that could be very possible.
That'd be great, Dan, and thank you very much as well at Claudia, also really great presentation.
Thank you very much. And the last thing that I wanted to mention, partly for our home audience, is our webinar for, I'm sorry, just need to look at our schedule. Our webinar for December is going to be on customizing wireless networks, aimed at mostly small libraries and home networks, because there's different things that you can do for your wireless network, like controlling what hours that it's open, what its passwords are, what the name of it is, and just looking forward to showing people what the options are. And that'll be on December 18th at 9 a.m. So thank you all for coming.